is coming to you from the beautiful metaverse. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And last week on Friday, I had said that I thought perhaps I would dedicate today to discussing clairvoyance and oracle work, and that is in fact what I intend to do. Now, I'm probably going to say a few other things on the way, because that's how it is. But I think today I want to talk about what clairvoyance is, how it works, what oracle work is, how it's different from clairvoyance and yet the same. And so I guess I'll launch into that. But if you're watching, feel free to make any comments, have any questions you would like. I will see them and respond to them as best I can. Um, I also want to say I'll not be doing my chat room this evening. Hello to Noreen. Thank you for joining us. Um, but my chat room will be back next week at the regular time. And hello to Magic in the chat room. And glad to have you join us. Hello to Lilith. Hello to Cosmo. It's good to see everyone. And so, clairvoyance. What is clairvoyance? Clairvoyance, to me, is a general term for psychic work where you are receiving messages in one way or another. There are all kinds of little words like clairaudience and clairsentience and clairvoyance that some people like to differentiate this into. I generally just use clairvoyance. And what I would say is that some people see symbols, some people hear words, some people get knowings, and they're all good. And hello to Janet and Aya in the chat room. Good to see you. I'm not a great believer in all of these little words. I think that they create separations that make everything more difficult. So I use clairvoyance generally, but technically, clairvoyance is seeing, which is what I do. But again, you might hear, you might just get a knowing. There are a lot of different ways of receiving psychic messages, and I just kind of lump them under the same term. What I would say to you is that if you're going to do this kind of work, most likely you're either going to see pictures or you're going to get words. And in both cases, if you do it for any length of time, you will probably also be getting knowings. But some people get that to start with. And that means you just know something that has come to you as a psychic message. You don't have to hear it or read it or anything else. It's just there. And hello to Bradley. Some people will have messages spell themselves out visually for them also. When I was trained in clairvoyance, I was trained using a Ouija board. Lady Crystal considered a valuable tool for training. We never had the slightest problem because she knew how to use it properly. And when I first what the Ouija board did is it allowed us to physically see the messages as they came, rather than waiting to be able to see them mentally. That came, of course, that's the point. But it did provide a gentle entry. Um, we could do another show on Ouija boards sometime. And, I can offend everyone with my lack of upset on the subject, but and hello to Pass Rest Prod, um, who says that the confirmations help reaffirm the trust in the messages. Absolutely, that was the value of using the board to get started. Um, and I was getting the images already, but it gave confirmation and it made it easier to rely on that opening period, which really wasn't very long. I'll tell you the very first things I got were images of flowers opening, like old stop motion film of flowers blooming. And only later did I find out that's a um, a yogic exercise. Um, and Janet says the last time she tried working with a Ouija, her brain was spelling the message before the Ouija had a chance to do it. And that's what happened to me too. Hello, Matthew. Um, as we worked with this to develop my clairvoyance, it did in fact develop, and I would see the letters before the board ever showed them. And then when we stopped using the board, at first, messages would spell themselves out in my head, often in lights like a marquee. It was very interesting. And then they didn't anymore, and I just got the words, and the messages would just come through. But it was a gradual opening, and I think there's a lot to be said for a gradual opening. You don't have to use a tool like a Ouija board, and I'm not suggesting that you do. But for me, it was helpful. Usually, when I tell people how to learn this, what I say is to work with a partner if you can, work alone if you can't, and write down what you get. Um, and interestingly enough, as I say that, Janet says that she now works with automatic writing, which is another form of how to bring these messages through. Um, and the important thing about doing clairvoyant work is that you cannot judge it while it's happening. You should not even think about it while it's happening. It should be like a cloud passing across the sky. You see it's there, you notice it. You don't think about it. You don't say, well, where is that cloud going? Because if your brain starts working in the middle of this, it will cut down, it will shut off the message. You have to be a passive receiver. Not everyone can do this. Not everyone can do it equally well. That is the hardest part of the operation, or one of the hardest parts, that you cannot judge the message until afterwards. And then you can analyze it and judge it to your heart's content, but you have to bring it through first. And that is an art in itself of being non-judgmental of what you're getting. And sometimes what you get may at first seem shocking. And in my experience, if that happens, if you let it continue coming, you'll find it's not really shocking at all. It's just how it got rammed through, for want of a better way to put it. Um, but I've had messages that occasionally came through strongly worded because for whatever reason, that's how they needed to come through. And then they were explained. Um, and Aya says in the chat room, um, that she has seen things that she has misinterpreted, but under different circumstances. Um, and that she just painted a Ouija board and used um, a blood Ouija board that they created in 1986 with a lot of activity. And you know, the Ouija board, a lot of people are afraid of them, but usually that's because they don't know how to use them. They don't know how to do proper shielding, um, or they've been taught to be afraid of them, and therefore they react accordingly. And hello to Sir Chad in the chat room. It's very important, again, to come without prejudgment, whether you're doing straight clairvoyance, whether you're using a tool like a Ouija board or a pendulum. And a Ouija board, for those who don't know, is a development of the pendulum. And it works in more or less exactly the same way. So if you're not afraid of a pendulum, there's nothing to really be afraid of with the Ouija board, unless you have yourself programmed it through things that you are afraid of. In which case you just need to reprogram it. But as with all psychic openings, when you first use it, and this is no matter how you're learning this art, you have a weird double situation. You need to trust what you're getting to bring it through, but also take it with a grain of salt because the channel is just opening. And when it's doing that, it can be hard to properly interpret the message. When you have been doing it for a while, it will get better. And Janet remarks that the spirits can be tricky, particularly for young people. I think that's often due to how they're pursuing it. You know, years ago, I did a radio show for Psychic Chicago, or actually, I beg your pardon, Telepathic Media Radio. It was entitled Ouija Board, Psychic Tool or Gateway to Hell, Hell, Hell. And I was representing the idea that it's a legitimate psychic tool. A man named Howard Hyam was representing the idea that it is a horrible gateway to bad things. And he told the story to illustrate his point of a group of frat boys who got drunk and took their Ouija board to a graveyard and had a bad experience. To which I can only say, what were you expecting? They wanted a bad experience if that's what they did and they got what they wanted. Why is anyone surprised? It's a psychic tool. You need to use it like one. You need to use it seriously if you're going to use it at all. And if you do that and you do your shielding and you invite your spirit guides and your gatekeeper guide to work with you, everything should be fine. Um, and it's been remarked um, in a message to me, any story that starts with a group of drunk frat boys will end badly. And that's the point. And also a group of teenagers looking for a spooky experience. If that's what you're looking for, you can't be surprised that you get it. Now, Lilith in the chat room says that you also have to bear in mind that witchy shows in the last 30 years and TikTok witches are not always the best thing to get your experience with psychic tools. And that certainly is true. And on the subject of the Ouija board and psychic things in general, but the Ouija board specifically, it has been in use for generations, variations on it for centuries, and it never had a bad reputation until certain television shows and movies of the 1960s. Obviously, certain Christian groups didn't like it because they don't like anything magical. But all the horror stories actually started coming out of that genesis. People used it with no problem until the media picked up the idea that it was a terrible thing. And same with haunted dolls. I once had someone ask me, why are dolls more likely to be haunted than any other object? To which my answer is, well, they're not. Look at the history of metaphysics. Look at all the stories of ghost hauntings and so forth that have come down to us. Look for a haunted doll among them. They're not there. Maybe one or two. Certainly not a common thing. But today you'd think they were. Why? It's because of certain television shows and movies that have popularized the idea. And I would say take it with a grain of salt. But getting back to clairvoyance, I wanted to talk about how clairvoyance works. And since we're at about halfway through our program, I'm going to jump ahead to that. When you get a clairvoyant message, and this is very important to understand if you want to do this kind of work, I would say this is especially true of clairvoyance, where you're going to be seeing things, but also when you get words, when you get knowings, no matter how it comes to you, it comes in the same way. It comes through your crown chakra and then comes down into your system. When spirits speak to you, they are not speaking. They are communicating telepathically. They don't have mouths. Of course they're not speaking. One of the things you'll sometimes hear is, well, why could that spirit who only spoke German in life communicate with you in English? Well, they're not speaking. They don't have a mouth. They're thinking at me. And what you're receiving is their thought. You're receiving concept. And that concept is what comes into your crown chakra and comes through your mind. And that's where it gains its words. So when it comes out of your mouth, it will come out of words that were in your mind to clothe their thought. Or if you're getting it as symbols, it's coming to you as symbols in your mind and your understanding to clothe their telepathic message. And so it's very important to understand your relationship to these things and to have as wide a reference as possible. I've often remarked that you cannot bring through a message about a concept you cannot at least approach. So the more you're familiar with, the more accurate your messages can be. I used to specialize quite frequently in past life regressions. I could do that because I'd studied history so intimately that I had a wide range of understanding that the messages could come to me through. and that I could understand with. Um, and because of that, I didn't have the kind of anomalies some people will have in doing that kind of work. Um, but if you do have an anomaly, if you're doing, for example, a message about a past life and you see something that historically shouldn't be there, that doesn't mean the message isn't right. It means you're not able to properly interpret all of it. Um, I'm reminded of a far memory book, and these were the works of a particular author many years ago. Interesting to read, but she talked about the ancient Egyptians capturing fireflies and using them as light. Having studied ancient Egypt very thoroughly, this is an absolute non-thing. Certainly not the way she portrayed it. Um, it was not something that happened. But does that mean this wasn't a legitimate past life memory? Well, I'm not going to say if I think it was or wasn't, but this does not mean it wasn't. It means that her historical reference wasn't broad enough to necessarily see exactly what was coming through. The best example I have of this is Rosemary Fletcher, the best psychic I ever knew. This woman could read anything. And she did a reading for Edward, um, really a reading for both of us in terms of what the future was going to hold. And she laid out 30 years. But she said that we were going to have a newspaper, or he was going to have a newspaper. I want to emphasize. He was going to have a newspaper going out to the entire world on a daily basis. And she thought she was talking about, and we thought too, an actual print newspaper going out all over the world. Because the internet, although in its infancy, was not widely known at this time. And how it was going to revolutionize everything was not known. And she did not have the language or the reference to see that what she was really talking about was an internet newsletter. And within just 2 to 3 years, it was in reality. It was going out to the whole world every day, just like she said. But because she didn't have a reference for the internet yet, she wasn't able to put it in those terms. This is why the more reference you can have in your brain, the wider the messages you can receive, because they're taking their words from you. They're taking the images from you to clothe their telepathic communication. In fact, I shouldn't even say they're taking the words and images from you. The message attracts these to give itself a form you can understand. The spirit has no control over that process. This is also an example. The great pagan philosopher Plutarch wrote about the Oracle of Delphi. And if I remember correctly, Plutarch was part of the high priesthood at Delphi, and he was asked the question, why aren't they as good as they used to be? Um, and it's either Plutarch or Porphyry. It's one of those guys. But the answer was that in earlier times, the oracles had been older aristocratic women who came to it with an education. But those women were no longer willing to take it, partly because the oracle work was so arduous that they felt it shortened the oracle's life. And so the people taking it in his time didn't have broad educations, and they were often anyone they could find willing to do it with any aptitude, because the people who could have done better would not take it. They did not have enough um, reference to get the same level of message. They didn't know enough about their world to have the kind of wide-ranging political messages early oracles at Delphi were able to bring through, because they had known who all the different countries were, all the different cities. They could place them far more easily, and so the message could take form far more easily because they had the reference. So if you're going to do this work, make sure you've got a broad reference. It will help tremendously. If you cannot conceive it, you cannot receive it. The message will still be accurate, but how you bring it through will be warped. And the messenger can always warp the message, no matter how good you are. But if you're good, you won't have much of it. And the two things that warp the message are doubt while you're doing it, and not having enough of a reference. And also, if you're not passive about it, this is a passive project. When you receive a message, you have to receive the message. If your mind starts thinking, you're going to mess it up. And so it's a very distinct process, a very distinct art that makes this possible. So as that message comes down through the crown chakra, it comes into and through the mind and ultimately through your mouth. Um, and again, you must have enough reference um, to be able to understand what you're told. Um, and Vivian in the chat room says, can you write in this transcript or some where you're closing prayer so I can write it down in my book of shadows? Um, we'll see what we can do. We will see what we can do. Um, because I mean, they're different every day. Um, you know, that's veering a little off from our subject, but as a Gemini, I am a person who likes for my prayers to be different, my rituals to be different, my altars to be different. If you've been watching my video for any length of time, you'll see that the altar behind me will frequently change. Hello to Sheila. Um, and for me, that's a very good thing. I know other people who find it important to keep things the same because it's a key that helps them to make their magical shift. For me, that isn't really how it works. For me, I need constant growth, constant development. Um, and I've received a message pointing out that one can go back and view previous episodes on the page that you're watching on now to get all the different prayers. Coming back to clairvoyance, my advice to the clairvoyant, and this is based on years and years and years of clairvoyant work, is take everything with a grain of salt. Remember that no matter how good you are, you can warp that message, and yet at the same time, trust it. When you're learning, you must take it with a grain of salt. And your trust should be based on your track record. And if you're doing this well, you will have a track record that tells you you should trust it. If I were to be told by the ancestors today to go out and do something very difficult and even beyond my comfort zone, I would do it because they have been that right over the course of all these years. And I would have to say that really across the board. I might question, have I brought it through accurately? But if it's coming accurately for me, it will come more than once. And then I know I've seen it too often. But when you're first starting and you haven't seen yet how well you're bringing it through, take it with a grain of salt. Everybody can mess up, especially when you're early in the process. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is oracle work. And being the kind of big definition person that I am, I really don't make a big division in terminology between oracle work and clairvoyance, and mediumship, which is another word for the same thing. Usually when people are using the term clairvoyance, they're getting a message, but not necessarily in a way that a specific spirit or group of spirits will be identified. But in fact, you're receiving them from your spirit guides, as I would say. but what you'll get is just the message for the most part. When you're doing oracle work, you're very much aware that you're getting it from a group of spirits or a particular spirit. And this is also called mediumship. Um, I do use these different terms, but I don't make a big division because there really is no division. It's the same process. It works exactly the same way. But when you're doing what might be called oracle work, you're likely to go into a deeper trance because you're receiving a more focused message and often a longer one. Um, for some people, that means their consciousness is gone during the experience. Um, and that can mean different things to different people. When I do an oracle, my consciousness is not gone, but it's not engaged. And afterwards, I won't remember as a rule what came through because my consciousness was not really there. If you want, should you ever get a clairvoyant reading from me and you have a question, ask it then. Because afterwards, after the first few minutes, it will be gone. I will not, I won't just remember it. If you ask immediately, I might. But presently, it will be gone and it will not come back. That's just how it works because it's not in my memory. Which makes it interesting, particularly all the years I worked with Lady Crystal, and we would write down the messages we were receiving from the ancestors to go back and read them later without the memory of the message having come through can be very interesting. And Sheila in the chat room remarks on seeing an older male behind me. And that's very cool. I'm not surprised. And I would imagine that's one of my ancestors. I don't know offhand which one, but my guess would be Uncle Bill. But it could be any of several. So these are some of the things that I would say about oracle work as such, or mediumship. In certain religions, certain religious traditions, it's very important. And Eddie in the chat room remarks, and hello, Eddie, that it's funny that good oracles have short memories. And it's because it's not in your memory. It's not your message. It's to come through you. If I want to try to remember an oracle, I have to do it immediately after. I have to try to put it in my brain immediately after bringing it, because within seconds or a minute or two at most, it's gone. And in the Karelian religion, we're very big on oracles. In the Icean religion, they're very big on oracles. We do them differently, but it's still the same practice. And of course, we're not alone in this. There are many others that rely on oracles for their connection to spirit. And if people like, I'll talk more about this tomorrow, or we can go on to another subject. Let me know. Later this week, we're going to have our interview with Joan Forrest Mage of the Life Force Arts Center in Chicago. And we will have a lovely week together. And now we will have our closing prayer. And thank you all for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you to help us to walk hand in hand with you and to receive your messages and your wisdom, to understand your words, and to let you help us to move forward. We know that you are there to help us, and we know that sometimes we do not pay attention. But we hope that we will pay more attention as we go forward, and that we will listen to the messages that we receive. When we are living in this world, sometimes the world just gets in the way. But we know that you can help us to stay focused and to be guided as we go forward. And we ask that you do so. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and with respect. May you be blessed now and always. And may you be blessed now and always as you go forward with your day.